So this is the second part of God's speech, and in the first part is kind of like uh, the wonders of the natural world, the foundations of creation, the the rain, the thunder, the thunderbolt, the um, all that. Then we have the description of the animal world, um, which is the lion and the ostrich and the war horse, and we just come out of the part where he's talking about the eagle and the hawk, and then that's where we are. And now we start Job 40. And the Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer, twice, but I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me so that you may be in the right? Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger. And look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them all in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then I also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, and his limbs like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade, the lotus trees cover him. The willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant for you, to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of man is false. He is laid low even at the side of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silent concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? And around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and flame comes forth from his mouth. In his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him, and immovable. His heart is hard as a stone, as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are unable to stop. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp pot shards. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him, he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. On earth, there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is on high. He is king over all the sons of pride. And that ends 41. All right.
All righty.
So in these sections, we have like the first part, which is kind of like Job's short response. We have the Lord issuing his challenge again, telling Job to dress for action like a man. Then there's this short section about God adorning himself with majesty and dignity. Then bringing down the wicked. And then we have the Behemoth, which is like the land beast. And then we have Leviathan, the sea beast. And Leviathan is all of chapter 41. So the Behemoth section is pretty short compared with, and this is like the climax of God's speech. This is the end of it.
Yeah.
It ends with the talk about Leviathan. So any overall thoughts?
Well, whenever I think about Behemoth and Leviathan, I think about of the what is it? The Aramonic and the Luciferic.
Yep.
And I think I think that's right. Like the Aramonic is on the dry land, and the Luciferic is in the wet, right? The dry and the wet.
The sea. Yeah.
And they represent, well, the wet represents the passions, and the dry is just the mechanical, the machine, the mechanistic worldview, however you want to, wherever you want to place that, right? It's something like that. This also goes to the beasts in Revelation. I just remember reading about it and talking about it when we did Emil Bach and his book.
Yep.
So
it's a good to point out that this is the Behemoth and Leviathan are not like the creatures we read about, like the ostrich and the lion. These are like composite mythological creatures that are representational of something. They're personifications of things. Yeah. So Behemoth is like the like you said, the ordered, structured beasts of the land, and then Leviathan represents the chaotic forces of the sea, so to speak. And we see that in we see that in the book of Revelation, which it's good to keep in mind that even though Job is a wisdom book, we've reached sort of an apocalyptic vision here.
Yeah.
It really is. Like, it's on par with what we see in Daniel, Ezekiel, in the book of Revelation. And in all those apocalyptic visions, you have these visions of different beasts that are not or these creatures that are not exactly correlated with, a lion, the ostrich, the ox.
Yeah.
So that's what we have. And there's people want to say, I don't want to get too far into this because it's just not interesting. But people say, oh, Behemoth's a hippopotamus and Leviathan is an alligator. That's all that's happening. And I'm like, well, like partly. I mean, but like any sort of composite mythological creature, it'll have aspects of it. And then, but there's other stuff that's happening there, like Leviathan's breathing fire and smoke. And
well, the question is, why do you want to make them hippopotamus and alligator? It's like The Incredible Shrinking Woman. I don't know if you remember that movie, but it's very old.
I don't think I've seen it.
But it's like taking something that's great, bigger than life, and just shrinking it down to something that you can swallow, right? Like,
yeah,
literally, like
it's reductionistic.
Propositionally swallow, and it makes it digestible. It makes it easy, and this is not easy. This is very, very difficult, very symbolic, very, like you said, apocalyptic, right? And so I would actually warn people about doing that because it diminishes. It's like when God opens up this whole speech and says, who's obscuring here?
Right.
That's what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a materialist reduction that I don't think you can read that as this. And then,
well, the reason I say that is because it's so much richer if you let it be what it is. Okay. If you reduce it down to that, then you're left with nothing. Really.
Well, and there may be something that God is trying to say that you're going to not be able to hear because you've reduced it to something that it's not.
Right.
So,
we'll
definitely get into that.
Something to nothing.
But I mean, like in all apocalyptic literature, there's a sense of unveiling, and you're seeing spiritual powers and forces that were not necessarily obvious before. And
but you have to be willing to let that veil, right, be moved aside. It's like, do you want to know what's behind the curtain when you get to Wizard of Oz, or do you not want to know? How many people didn't want to pull that curtain aside?
Right.
It takes courage to find out that what you believed was ridiculous or right.
Well, and this isn't just like so we have in the first part of God's speech sort of this these scenes of basically the natural world, and obviously there was all kinds of connections that we were discussing to the human world, to people, to like the thunderbolts actually like also representative of the insights of wisdom, or the lion we connected back to when they were talking about the lion being representative of the evil people that sort of wait and prey on other people, and or the Job compared the poor oppressed people who were kind of outcasts in the wilderness, so to speak, to the wild donkey.
Right.
And so there were obviously, even though God's talking about the natural world, he's talking about more than that. And so we want to see that this isn't just a continuation of more of showing this isn't a nature documentary.
No, this is
so there's also there's a what is it? It's building in intensity. By the time we get to Leviathan, like things are at kind of like a fever pitch.
Right. And that, like you were saying that, God compares the poor to the donkey, or right. It's, this is the thing about this kind of metaphorical, poetic language. It's not talking about, like you said, it's not a documentary. It's not documenting something. It's not factual. It isn't literal. It isn't writing it down in columns. It's not ordering it. It's talking about the quality of something.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, when you think about the Behemoth and Leviathan, you have to think about what are the qualities that are being discussed here, and how do they transfer onto what God is saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's talking about quality. He's always talking about quality, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so let's start at the beginning here and kind of work our way through this. So the Lord says to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." So this is one of those points where you're like, oh, is Job wrong? and what is God saying here? And you always have to sort of keep this in mind with what happens later when God says that Job is right.
Yeah.
So like there is obviously Job. For me, Job has framed everything in sort of this courtroom scenario of that there needs to be this justice. Justice needs to be brought to his situation. He has confidence that God will bring it. He's unsure of what is happening, and this is part of Job's own confusion of he doesn't understand anything that's going on, and so he wants God to bring an indictment against him, and so there's I don't know, there's an implied Job. I don't think Job ever goes so far to accuse God of wrong. I don't think you can say that, and people will, but I don't think that happens. And so what is God saying here? There is a danger.
I think I know what God's saying. Can I say what I'm thinking?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, in the King James it says, "Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it." So it's like God is putting into context what this conversation, the quality of this conversation. Okay. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm God and you're Job. Okay, so let's just look at this. Do you think you can tell me anything that I don't already know? Do you think there's any room for argument here? Like, I think it's a very pragmatic kind of question, actually. Mm-hmm. And then Job answers and says, no, no. I have nothing to say. Like he realizes, or he doesn't realize, but in answering that question, because God says, if you think so, then go for it. If you think you can do those two things, contend and reprove, then have at her. And then Job just capitulates. He's like, no, I'm vile. Mm-hmm. That's what it says in the King James.
Right.
What shall I answer you? I'm going to put my hand in my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he says, right? So I don't think this is a condemnation of Job. And I don't think it's an admission of guilt by Job. I think it's just an interaction between God is setting the stage here for Job to listen to him. That's what he's doing. He said, okay, basically what he's saying is, are you in listening mode or do you want to talk some more?
Right.
Right?
Right. That's a great way to put it.
You want to keep going here, or should we just let me talk and you listen?
Mm-hmm.
And Job's like, no, good. I'm good. Right.
Right. Let me read a couple things from previously what Job has said. First, I'm going to read 23:4 because I think this is interesting. This is Job replying. Let's see. This is in the third cycle. So he says 23:3. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know that he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, he would pay attention to me.
Okay, here's a thought, Jess. This comes to my mind right away when you read that. How many times have we been in had some kind of disarray within an intimate relationship, whether it's between us and a spouse or a sibling or a parent, and we feel like we've been unjustly treated, right? And we want to approach them and like advocate for ourselves, and so we spend all this time with building up these things that we're going to say. How come this, and why did you say that, and all the things that we want to bring to the table because we feel like we need an answer to those things. And then the moment arises, and it really all it ends up being is, I really love you, and I'm really sorry, and I don't want this to be between us anymore. Right. And all those arguments feel ridiculous in the end, right? It's like, you may even think about bringing forward one of them, and it just doesn't have any. It's like a balloon with no air. It's nothing. It only means something to you in the absence of the other. You know what I'm saying? And Job in that section is trying to have a conversation with God. God's not anywhere. And in the absence of the other, he builds up these arguments, right? Like we do in the absence of our other, like our intimate other. And then in the presence of that other, we just lay our hand over our mouth like Job does here.
Right. Let me read this other part in Job 29. This is what he says about, let's see, Job 29:9. I'll start a little bit before that. Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone on my head. And by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime, when my friendship of God was upon my tent. Okay, then he talks about, when I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood, and the princes refrained from talking, and they laid their hand on their mouth. Yeah, then it says, when the ear heard, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw, it approved.
This is the thing. I thought about this actually yesterday. I was thinking about this, how when people, like in that description of people hearing Job speak, when they put their hand on their mouth, they're not saying, he's making me feel dumb and I'm afraid to speak.
Right.
They're saying, like, he talks about this, that he's like the latter rain to them, right? Which means he's bringing them nourishment. There is no longer any reason to say anything.
I have nothing. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to. I'm not speaking.
Right. And that's exactly that's why I think God's saying, okay, is there anything else you have to say, or are you going to just listen now? Because this is he's setting the stage.
Yeah. And even in that first part that I read in 23, where he says that he will fill his mouth with arguments, but he says of God, he says, would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, he would pay attention to me.
Yeah. And
so Job even knows that there's no, like, and he says this before. Here, let me read 9:14 real fast. So this is early on in the first cycle. So 9:14, he says, or let's start with 9:13. God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him bowed the helpers of Rahab. How then can I answer him, choosing my words with him? Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. I must appeal for mercy to my accuser. If I summoned him, he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice, for he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He would not let me get my breath, but fills me with bitterness. If it is a contest of strength, behold, he is mighty. If it's a matter of justice, who can summon him? So I think Job, we see later on that Job has more confidence in himself than at this point. This is early on, but early on, he knows this isn't, when Job cries out, he's not crying out in the sense of like, I'm going to contend with God and fight him tooth and nail about this. That's never been Job's
he seeks resolution. He seeks reconciliation. He seeks closure. That's what he seeks. And that's what we all seek when we're at, when there is confusion within our relationships, and mostly our intimate relationships. That those are the ones that cause us the most pain. And of course, the relationship with God would be the most intimate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you sense that there's something off in your relationship with God, then by all means, seek the answers from him, right? Do what Job did. Contend with him, argue with him, slam a few doors if you have to. Like, what the heck?
Right.
Right. Like, wouldn't you do that with your partner to resolve the thing, to bring it to light, right? I think if you don't do it with God, then you don't really believe that he's there, honestly, and it doesn't matter to you. Well,
and that's what the friends do. They would rather repent, lie about their own integrity than actually deal with God.
Right. So they can get on their way to what? Everyday life, making money, sleeping, eating, whatever. Right?
Yep.
Normalcy.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And people, okay, so when I was doing my Bible study, one of the guys especially, like, he's like, this is too harsh. This is, he couldn't sort of, he couldn't see like everything that you're saying in this is just too much. It's just this. And I think one thing you have to keep in mind is who God is talking to. He's talking to Job. He's not talking to he's talking to the man who was the greatest man in the East, a man who had basically a kingdom.
Right.
This Job is not a pushover. He's not a sensitive soul. He's not a someone who's been sort of pushed down and taken advantage of and all these things. He's a man who suffers. And so, but just like Job remembers back in the day when he would come to the gate and then these people would act like that towards him. And now he's acting like that towards God. And God is, in a sense, he's reflecting to Job back. He's personally addressing Job and who Job is. You imagine like maybe someone who's a little more, I don't know, a little more frail, a little like God won't come at them with that force.
So you're saying he's meeting people where they are, essentially.
Yeah, he's meeting Job where he's at.
Yeah.
And this, well, and this gets to who God thinks Job is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the thing that God or Job is not saying here, but is just present, is that God showed up and he's talking to Job.
Mm-hmm.
And that must mean something as important is happening, because God just doesn't just do that.
Or maybe he does, but nobody asks him to.
Right.
That's the thing.
But that still means that something important happened. Like, why?
Yeah.
And
so
so this Job like Job is important and God is treating him as important, even. And so this is like, it'd be like if I tweeted something about, someone famous. I'm just sitting here in my office, and then I tweet something snarky, and then they actually show up at my door and they're like, "Hey, we need to talk this through." Like, who do you think I am? They're like, no, we really do. This is super important. like, like that would be crazy. And anyway, I think people miss this. They think, and when people miss it, they also think God's being petty. Like God is like, making a mountain out of a a mountain out of a molehill, and just be like, why is this frail, egocentric God freaking out at this poor guy? You're like, you don't understand what's happening then.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, I wouldn't even use those words, freaking out, because I don't think he is. I think this is like I've said before, this is like a master apprentice, father son conversation. That's why I want to take it down a notch all the time, right?
Right.
But we have such an idea of God as being this, like, the great old man in the sky who just, with this booming voice, that's the only way he ever talks to anybody, right? Meanwhile, we write our wish lists and we mail them off to Santa Claus, knowing that he isn't real. But we still do that, okay? That's how we pray to God most of the time, I think, if I'm honest, okay? And so this is why God is so humble to me, because he still answers those prayers, right? Even though I have them addressed to the North Pole.
Right.
Okay, like that's my poetic way of saying I don't really believe.
Yeah.
Right? But then you're hanging off the side of a cliff by your fingernails. And when you call out, in all honesty, in total desperation, like Job, okay, God answers. I know that. I've been there, okay? And God shows up. But only when you have nothing else to distract you. And your faith is, how do I put this? Yeah, you've lost, essentially, you've lost everything. You're not like, you're not gonna drop your letter off at the post office to Santa and then go do some shopping, right? Because you got all this stuff lined up for your day. No, you're at the end of your rope.
You just sit at the post office and wait for a reply.
And who's there to meet you at the end of your rope?
Yeah.
Always, right? So I don't think, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think it indicates anything about God. It has to do with us. It indicates everything about the way we actually think about God. Right? And that's why I love what George MacDonald says about the Book of Job, that it is the greatest, act of faith to make a claim on your creator, because this is what God wants. It's what every father would love his child to do, I think.
Yep.
Make a claim on them. You owe me. You brought me into this world, right? I need an answer. And if your child says that to you, I need an answer from you, it means that they care about what you have to say. Right?
Yeah, and that's that hidden wisdom of God that's at the very center of this whole book. And
you don't ask that question if you don't care what the parent has to say, or God. Right? Yep. It matters to you. It matters. It's life and death, actually.
Yeah, and so in that new Job commentary that I recently got, he talks about how at this point, so like I think Job understands exactly everything you're talking about. And because of Job's response, he's like, this isn't him feeling bad, feeling shameful and being like, um, he understands what's happening here. Like God is speaking to him like he used to speak at the gate, and then everyone would be
Put their
quiet
hand.
and listen intently. So this is Job listening intently. And so because of this response, like you can see sort of the natural world, God revealing his ways, his wisdom in the natural world. And now what we get into is a vision of it's a revelation in this next part that we just read through. And this is like, so in the commentary, he talks about how God does this, Job responds this way, and God actually rewards him with further wisdom and revelation.
Right.
So
and if you want to draw that comparison to Job speaking to the men at the gates and God speaking to Job now, then God's words would be like what to Job? The latter rain.
Yep. Yeah, this is Job being refreshed. He's being renewed.
This is the thing about quality that I'm talking about, right? This is this is not condemnation and guilt and Jesus said, I did not come into the world to bring condemnation.
Right.
Why did he say that? Because that's what we think of God. That's what we think God does.
Yep. And
then we read Job and we map that whole presupposition onto it.
Yep. And that's what Job's friends do.
That's what they do.
and all right. So
okay, that's only 3 verses.
So the Lord answers Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. I will question you and you make it known to me. So this is exactly what he said the first time. There's a repetition.
Yeah. And I love that because it's like, he doesn't say, I will question you and you will listen. He says, I will question you and I want to hear what you think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep. That's what he says.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for yelling.
Yeah. And this is
I just think everybody misses this.
I know. Chesterton, in his introduction to the book of Job, talks about God's sardonic humility. He's like,
yes.
He's like God comes down and adopts. Chesterton says he adopts the courtroom drama that Job has set up. That this is some sort of adjudication needs to happen, and he says God just asks for the right of every defendant, which is to cross-examine the witness, and so he starts asking questions, and so this is God. This is God playing Job's game.
Yeah.
And there, while simultaneously blowing up the presuppositions, but in a way that enlarges Job's world and makes everything more beautiful and amazing.
Well, in this verse here, verse 8, he says, will you condemn me that you might be righteous, that you might be right? Mm-hmm. That stood out to me. Or justified. That's about intention, right? It's like you're going to condemn somebody just so that you feel like you're standing on the right side of history, mm-hmm. or you know what I mean?
Right.
And that is a lack of communication, because communication is made up of speaking and listening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Jordan Peterson and Piers Morgan talked about this in their conversation. Remember when Peterson said, I'm getting better at listening, and Piers Morgan said the same thing.
Yep.
He said the same thing, and he said it's actually amazing What you can learn when you listen.
Yeah.
You know, and it's true, because a lot of the time we speak, someone else talks, while they're talking, we're already formulating our next sentence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're not learning
Right.
anything from what they're saying to us. And so, yeah, this is, I thought that was interesting. Will you condemn me so that you feel like you're right?
Right. And I think, okay, if let's say if God doesn't show up kind of at this point, like we've seen Job undergo this transformation, and by the end he's sort of confident in his case, in his own integrity, and he's talked about how there's sort of this veil and he doesn't understand where God is, what he's doing. And there's this danger at this point, like if God doesn't show up, where Job could have more confidence in his own integrity than in God himself. And so this is part of what, for the child that is very beloved by their parents, there's always the chance that the child could become prideful, and then that pride is so difficult to, because you're like, well, we love you, but it doesn't mean you get to act like a self-conceited.
Well, it always ends up, I think the pride ends up, it's such an interesting conundrum. Like you have this in fairy tales all the time, right? You have the neglected child of the evil stepmother, and the I don't know, impotent father or something like that, who shows a lot of integrity, right? And can take all the pain that's dealt out to them. And then you have the princess who has the doting parents and just becomes like a little tyrant.
Right.
Okay. And those two characters are really interesting, because what happens, I think what Peterson means by the Oedipal mother, right? The devouring mother. I mean, even the father can participate in that spirit, right? Where you have this child that becomes puffed up with pride because they feel all this, doting on them. So they think they must be important. So then they take on this self-importance, which is pride, right? But they're never actually given any agency. Like they're everything's given to them. They never have to go out and get anything. Okay. And so what ends up happening is they become resentful and angry, and that turns them into a tyrant, a proud tyrant. Okay. The kind of tyrant that thinks that they're really special. Because why? Because they are really special. It's been obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious that they're really special, right? They're the princess or the prince or the whatever. Why am I saying all this now?
Well, because we're trying to, like I was kind of pointing to maybe a danger that exists on. So Job realizes this sort of value of his integrity.
I was going to say that there is this weird codependence thing going on with that characteristic. Like pride, I don't think pride can just grow out of nothing. Like it has to have a place to grow. It needs a petri dish, in a sense, right? So does humility, for that matter. Also needs a petri dish, needs the right environment, which is the flip side of the coin, right? Within the fairy tale, the little boy or the little girl that grows up with the evil stepmother and all that stuff, right? Cinderella is a good example. So how this relates to Job, like I just don't see Job having any issues with pride. Like, I don't think that he wasn't in that petri dish, ever in the whole book. He's
Right.
never in that place where he could, he's not codependent. He's actually giving life to other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he's, yeah. I just don't know. I personally don't see pride emerging out of that, is what I'm trying to explain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that. That's why I think it's not even relevant to wonder if he was prideful. Because I just don't see Job coming out of that place where that kind of pride, the pride that binds and blinds, as Paul Vanderklay would say, right, emerges. I mean, we all have moments where we feel good about ourselves, but is that wrong? That's my question.
No, it's that, and that's not what I'm really talking about. There's, it's the. I mean, it's hard to talk about because, I agree with you. I don't think Job is on his way to this, but there's also a way in which, it's like maybe the sin of the prodigal son, that he realizes his importance to his father, and then he just is like, um, I'll take everything right now. But maybe that's too.
To me, that's naive. That's what that is. It seems like even the prodigal son,
Mm-hmm.
he's naive.
For
He's
sure.
almost silly. He's youthful, right? He's not thinking ahead. He doesn't have any idea. He's not planning for his future. Like if he was, yeah, because when he ends up coming back, what the father basically demonstrates is that he is the son of the father. He's the heir. He's the prince. He is that special thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he doesn't believe that. He doesn't even believe it when he leaves, because he thinks he only has this much
Mm-hmm.
of his inheritance. Okay, give me my what? Peace.
Right.
So he doesn't see the whole picture. He doesn't know that everything that is his father's is his. And that has to do with authority. Okay, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like if his father died, he would be what? In authority. He would be ordering around the servants and taking care of business and selling and trading and
Mm-hmm.
right. He has
Yep.
no. He thinks it's a bit of money. That's what he thinks. The prodigal son.
Yep.
Right. So
Well, maybe that's a good way to put it then. Like the prodigal's naive. There seems to be, Job has reached a point. I think it's whatever the chapter is, 33, or 32, whenever the words of Job are ended. Like there came a point where he reached the end of, he had this much knowledge, it came to an end, and without God showing up, he doesn't have anywhere to go. Like, and this is obvious by his non-response to Elihu.
Yeah.
Why doesn't, because Job has nothing left.
He's said everything already.
He said everything. He's not.
Yeah.
He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't try to explain himself again. And he just needs God. And this is what, God is bringing knowledge to him at this point, like real and wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's so tricky talking about but there is something, at least personally, that about the pride thing where you're like,
We need to okay, I've thought a lot about pride.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
that's
like
why I'm asking you about.
Yeah, I don't like the classic Christian pride is a sin and, blah blah blah. End of story, right? Let's qualify this.
Mhm.
That's what I think. What are the qualities that were, and that's why I made the long explanation about the petri dish and the emergence of this kind of tyrannical, codependency, right? That comes out of the Oedipal mother, the devouring
Mhm.
mother, right? And but if your kid comes home from school with a like A+ report card in every subject, and they threw it on the table and you got all excited and said, "This is amazing," and they said, "Yeah, well, you know I don't want to be proud, so like how what's going to happen next, right? Like, how would you want him to act? You would want him to jump up and down and celebrate, because he worked hard for that.
Yeah.
So I think God wants us to celebrate our accomplishments because
Mhm.
we are his children and
Mhm.
he is proud of us, right?
Yeah.
So, but we need a relationship in order
Mhm.
to exercise that properly, right? So we go to our Father and with our pride and we share it with him, because why?
That's
Because
good.
he's our Father and he gave us life. Okay.
Mhm.
And when we're overcoming it, that's what we're doing. We're like, look at me. I'm doing it. I'm
Yeah.
overcoming.
Yep.
Because that's what it says in Revelation that we are. We are
Mhm.
what? Overcomers.
Right.
And you cannot overcome something if you just consistently aren't proud of it. Right?
Mhm.
Should be. You should be. You should be proud of accomplishing the thing called life that God gave you, because it's making you, and it's making you into a better person. And that's what the point is.
Mhm.
Okay. So you're participating with
Mhm.
God in something. It's good.
Mhm. Right. Okay, so let's read this and I want to get your thoughts. Have you an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity, and clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them all in the dust together, bind their faces in the world below. Then I will also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you.
You want to know what I think of that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it I think it depends on what you mean by wicked and proud.
Okay.
Like, this is the thing that I'm saying, what I said before about being in having the right relationship for pride, right? When you run to your Father with your report card or the painting that you made, right? It's a shared joy.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you're sharing with your Father. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that I think that that is something that Christians can potentially miss out on if they are afraid of pride. Okay. That they're going to run to their Father and share their joy at their accomplishments. This is why the prodigal son lays in the pigsty and says, well, I could just be a servant.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what does his father do? He puts fine clothes on him and he throws him a party and he celebrates his return. In other words, he wants him to be proud of what? Being his son.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wants. So, what who is God talking about here? What are the proud and the wicked to God? Because the book of Job does this a lot. Like, the friends talk about the wicked, and then Job talks about the wicked. And those are two different portraits that are being painted, right? Like the friends, it seems to me, consider the wicked to be wicked because of what appears in their lives, like what manifests: poverty, disease. Okay, that means they're wicked because God's not, prospering them, right? Because the righteous prosper and the wicked suffer. Okay. But then Job flips that and he says, no, the wicked are actually prospering. So what's happening with this definition of the word wicked? And I feel like when I read this, that God is actually, what's the thing here? This is a good time to read that quote from Joseph actually this morning. I don't know if you saw it.
I did read it, but it's not coming to mind what he said. Because this whole section for me is probably one of it's the most confusing part of God's speech.
Okay, let me read this really quick. I think it'll help. Joseph quoted Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik. Every experience is a moral outbreak of infinitude, and the moral purpose of man is to exist in the uniqueness with which God has endowed him. The existential experience of Judaism does not separate the realms of evil and good, devil and angel, purity and impurity. One realm, which emanated from the radiance of the Shekinah, fills the entire universe. Halakhic Judaism sanctifies the profane. The entire world is elevated and crowned with a renewed soul, acquires eternal holiness, and united with its creator. The boundaries are blurred and disappear. Before our eyes is spread out one great creation in which the divine morality is revealed. This creation sings praises to the Creator, the songs of a creature driven by moral longing for its creator, which is Job. Like, that's what I said to him. I actually wrote, that's what God's speech is in the book of Job. The entire world elevated and crowned with a renewed soul, right? And united with its eternally holy and united with its creator. And Job is the song of a creature driven by a moral longing for God. So, like that line in here about the boundaries are blurred and disappear. I think that's what happens. That's why it's hard to parse. When you've been through the book of Job, you've talked about these two ideas of wickedness, the ones that the friends have, the one that Job has.
Right.
And then you read God's thing here, all of a sudden you got a big knot, right? A big tangle.
Yeah. Well, and in like following that, if Job has an insight about what the wicked really are and who the righteous really are, then God is sort of showing that so when God's saying, look on everyone who is proud and bring him low and tread down the wicked where they stand, he's like that's what's going to happen. It falls in line with the apocalyptic thing where there's going to be this judgment, and he's like saying, Job, you're right where the line, you're correct on where the line is. It's in the integrity of the soul. Right. It's not in the appearances. And this is where the judgment's going to happen. This is where the apocalypse this is what I'm going to do when I clothe myself in glory and splendor, is to make these judgments at this level.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's just the way that it's going to happen. Right. Like, because how does Peterson talk about it? Like this highest value judges like you just automatically feel made low and It's like when Job says to God, well, I am vile. I'm just going to keep my hand over my mouth, right? Because God's there.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, no, now I know what I really look like, because I
Right.
can compare, right? And so, yeah, I agree with that. And I don't think that, I guess what I was saying before is I don't think that it's making a statement about what is pride and what is
right. Well, if God's agreeing with Job, like, because my initial reaction is to read this with the definition of what the friends talk about as wicked, is whatever. I'm like, what's God talking about this for? This doesn't seem right. But having this idea of that Job is correct about who the wicked are and who the righteous are, and now God is saying, now that you understand who the wicked and the righteous are, this is where the judgment happens. And this is like, and it's in the,
but God is the judge. And
God is the
judge just simply by his being there.
Right.
So like just him being present judges everything. It falls into its place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm trying to avoid is a new definition of the wicked and the proud, right? Like, let's not go there. Let's not do that. Let God be the judge, right?
Right.
Because there isn't. We're always going to fall short. We're always going to fall short with our definition about it because we don't know. See, this is the heart, right? These people that end up being made low are going to be made low because what's in their heart. And that is not something that we can see. We don't know what that is.
Well, this is interesting in light of what happens immediately after this, where God then tells the friends, you were wrong, Job is right, and he's going to make a sacrifice on your behalf.
Yeah.
That's what this looks like.
Yes.
What God's talking about.
Yeah.
It looks like, it looks like God forgiving and Job offering the sacrifice.
Right. It's kind of like, just imagine you're at a cocktail party and you're with your peers. Everybody's on the same level. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. And let me think of a theme. You're there because you all are making about the same amount of money, and it's pretty good money, and you got the money because you worked really hard and you got into some kind of I don't know, little financial club together, and here you all are celebrating because you're all making
lots of money,
$500K a year, right? So you're all on the same level. And then someone like Elon Musk walks in. Okay.
Blows open your little party.
What happens? What happens to you? You're made low.
Mm-hmm.
And your pride seems ridiculous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're proud of yourself, right? Oh, I'm 500K. You're 500K. Look at us. Mm-hmm. And then Elon Musk walks in and you're like,
well, and then what if Elon Musk wants to speak to the group? Like, you just let him. Like, this is the covering of the mouth.
Right.
And then the idea that why would Elon Musk come to your 500K party and then speak? It's because he wants more out of you. Like, right. He wants to build you up. He wants to.
But the effect is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. But the effect is being made low first.
Right. It's like suddenly, he says, deck yourself now with majesty and excellency, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Mm-hmm. And behold everyone that is proud, right? Look on everyone that is proud and bring him low. It's just simply your presence in the room.
Yep.
That's, and this is what happens when God shows up. All of that falls into place. It happens.
Yeah,
just like it would happen if Elon Musk walked into your.
And this goes back to the effect that Job had in those scenes when he would go to the gate of the city, and the men would sit down and they would listen to him, and they
Yes,
wouldn't,
of
like,
course.
this is exactly what's happening in this situation too.
Yeah.
And Job gets it.
Yeah.
There's also this interesting harvesting metaphor that works its way through this whole thing. And when you hear about everyone being brought low and then tread down the wicked where they stand, binding their faces and like hiding them in the dust and binding up the there's I just wanted to point that out because it works its way through Behemoth and well, especially Leviathan.
Cool.
But we probably need to move on to Behemoth, or we're never going to get through the rest of it. So behold Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Well, this whole line, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. So we already talked about this being a creature that's a composite, that's representative of something. And it's the Behemoth, I think, just means beasts. Like, it's plural even.
Is it like, would you say it could be like an egregore too? Or do you want to avoid that altogether?
I don't know. I don't know about. I don't. It could be, because I think if I had to say something which Behemoth represents civilization.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And this is what God says. He's like, behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. It's almost like as mankind is being made, civilization is being made as well.
Well, it says it here, side note, American Revised Version says, as well as you, which I made as well as you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with you. Yeah.
There's yeah, and so I think it corresponds also with the beast on the land, and it's in Revelation.
Oh yeah.
There's also the beasts in Daniel. There's the four beasts, which represent different kingdoms.
Yeah.
So Behemoth is just kingdoms writ large that are on the world stage.
Civilization.
It's a type of behemoth. It's a the Roman Empire behemoth, the Chinese government behemoth, whatever it is, they're all behemoths. And it's interesting that, like,
and they do kind of roll across the land like a big monster, right? Gobbling up, like you get that. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how what's the word? Not tame, but just not what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
domesticated.
It's not even domesticated. It's still a wild animal, but it's like so chill. It's just like wandering about, eating some grass,
hanging out in the shade.
Hanging out in the shade, like doesn't mind if the river's like roaring. It's like takes a drink. And that's kind of how
it's so huge.
It's so big that it just lumbers around.
Yeah.
It's docile. That's what I wanted to say.
Docile. There you go. Yeah.
You just imagine like a big dinosaur just sort of wandering around, doing whatever it's like. It has no predators.
That verse 24, where it says he takes it with his eyes and his nose or behold, he drinks up a river and hastens not. He trusts that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He takes it with his eyes. His nose pierces through snares. Here it says that the Revised Version says, shall any take him when he is on the watch, or pierce through his nose with a snare? So he's lumbering around, but he's like, he's aware.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you want to say that this is civilization, it seems to me that when civilizations fall and crumble, they're no longer aware. They're like their outward watch, the watch that they would have kept is gone. Mm-hmm. And now they're all turned inward, right? And they no longer see. outside of
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And that's kind of the beginning of the end for
Right.
civilization.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also gets to like he's not it's not tame. So like piercing the nose with a snare, I think so like you would do that to an ox to lead it around. And this is not going to be led around by any man.
Mm-mm.
And like you said, it's aware. Um so there's so like there's this whole thing about behold the strength in his loins, the power of the muscles in its belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. Um, for like, I don't think that means tail. I think, well, this is me saying that there's disagreement about whether this means tail or if it means a reproductive member. And
Mm.
and so there's this like, I think it's talking about just the strength and vitality
Yeah.
of a civilization and how it um how they grow and multiply.
Yeah.
And I mean that sort of makes sense to me. And then there's also this sort of these, man, it's so well written. Like makes his tail stiff like a cedar. And there's almost like there's a metaphor there for also the just the natural resources that a civilization uses. So the
Right.
like the cedars of Lebanon,
Yeah.
the forests that are cut down to build
Make cities.
homes and cities and all the infrastructure. And then also where it says his bones are tubes of brawn, his limbs are like bars of iron. Like the
Mhm.
structure that holds it up is made up of bronze and iron. And I want to go to Genesis 4:22. Um, so this is the lineage of Cain, and so it says
Mm.
Zillah also bore Tubal Cain, and he was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron.
All right.
And Peugeot talks about how Tubal
Metalwork.
Cain is the one who founds this, or maybe it's later, founds the city, and then is sort of it's the birth of technology and
Yeah.
all this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so you can see how like bronze and iron are like the skeleton which holds up civilization, the technology, these metalworks, as well as like cedar, and then talking about the mountains yielding food, and then him gathering up the river. And you can just see how, a big, you know, Cairo, Egypt, or whatever, like, they just use the Nile. They don't worry
Mhm.
about flooding. They've got it under control. They can manage all that. Like all these systems are in place, this technology and whatnot.
Yeah.
You want to say anything else about Behemoth or?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, it seems very obvious, really, that it's talking about the harmonic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's talking about it in an interesting way because it's so docile and God is so proud of it.
Well, it's funny because in the in Emil book, when he talks about the little beast
Mm-hmm.
with the small horns,
Mm-hmm.
I think one horn is small and one like it looks wonky. Like you imagine this little wonky thing,
Yeah.
kind of like a crippled Godzilla or something,
Right.
Um, and it's pretty docile in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
It
It's just like the lamb. It's like a goat or a lamb or something with a horn, something.
No, it says a beast. I
Is
should
it?
look. Maybe I can look it up while you're. I'll see if I can find it later. But um, it's not very big, but it's big. But it's
Right.
not as big as the Luciferic, right? The
Mm-hmm.
thing in the water. And I mean, that is true, right? If you think about those things as civilization and the passions, what is bigger than civilization,
Oh, yeah.
right? The passions.
Yeah, tears everything apart if you let it.
It'll destroy the civilization.
Right. Well, and
And
even here, like the behemoth gets this much text, and then Leviathan gets this much text.
yeah, and the cool thing in the book of Revelation is that these two beasts are, you have to pass by them under the legs of the archangel Michael.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pass by them. And I can't remember exactly where that is, but I just remember at that point he talks about the fact that they're not to be destroyed, but rather bridled.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out in this next little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That language is actually used, right? Who can bridle?
Yeah. Well, even piercing Behemoth's nose with a snare is like, can you bridle this?
Can you bridle it? Yeah. And that's the proper response. We always think in terms of black and white, we always think it either it lives or it dies, we have to celebrate it or destroy it, heaven and hell, we've got all these nice little categories, but like that thing I read from Yosef, the lines are blurred.
Mm-hmm.
Right? These things are not just like it says here. The existential experience of Judaism does not separate the realms of evil and good, devil and angel, purity and impurity, right? So, like we have this feeling like, how do I say this? Like Lucifer is going to be wrapped up and all his angels and thrown into the pit forever and ever, and we'll never have to, he's going to be destroyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the book of Revelation said that you're going to have to pass by these two beasts, right? Under the legs of the angel.
Yeah, like one foot is in the ocean and one foot
One's
is on
the
land.
dry land. Yeah. And there's just so much more nuance to all of this.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to Leviathan. Okay, so like I said, like Joe, the whole of God's speech is kind of building up to this point. And Leviathan is well, he's mentioned elsewhere in scripture. Behemoth isn't. So Behemoth doesn't have a lot of other places that it written about in the Bible, but Leviathan's mentioned in Isaiah and in Psalms. And well, Psalm 104:26, it talks of it's almost like it's only one short verse, but it says the seas where the ships are and where Leviathan plays. So in Psalm 104, Psalm 104 is a very celebratory depiction of all of creation. It's almost like a creation account psalm, and they're like Leviathan is like playing, and so here we have a little bit of a more confrontational encounter with Leviathan, and I think Isaiah is a little bit of, let me find that real fast. It's Isaiah 27:1. It says, in that day, the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea.
Where's that?
It's Isaiah 27:1. And it's also good to note that there's a few Mesopotamian myths, at least two. I think there's two that talk about in their mythology, and I think that it's creation myths, where the sea serpent and the storm god encounter each other in battle, and that creates the world. So it's interesting that God is showing up in the whirlwind, and then we have Leviathan, which in one of the myths, the sea serpent is called Lotan, which I think shares a root, possibly root word with Leviathan. So there's already sort of in this personification of chaos and the sea, there's already sort of like cultural stories that this is borrowing from.
Right.
So it's not necessarily coming out of nowhere, but like Leviathan is in the Bible a little bit, but this is also like in Genesis 1, we don't have the personification of chaos. We have the tohu wabohu, the formless void. So the thing without form and also empty. But here it's the chaos is personified. Because also where the world in Genesis 1 is brought out of the sea, and the sea is always chaotic. And it's also called the deep, and the dry land comes out of it. And so
Right.
anyway, so
That's interesting. Yeah. The
yeah,
dry land
and
civilization comes out of. Could you say that civilization comes out of the passions in that case? I mean, certainly, because that's what happened with Cain and Abel. Cain was a victim of his passions.
and in his desire to protect himself, he built the cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it says. I mean, that's what Bach says. The Luciferic, or Steiner says this, delivers up to the Aramonic.
Well, and even in that Blake illustration where he shows, it's the illustration where God is showing Job Behemoth and Leviathan. It's in that. So God is up above. There's like this cloud barrier, which represents like the imaginal. And he's going, God is like pointing down from, and Job is sitting there, and underneath Job is Behemoth. And then underneath Behemoth is Leviathan, is all twisted up, and then there's the waters and stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's that, almost that structure there. It's interesting. So, and let's not also forget that Leviathan comes up at the beginning of Job. Let me just read that little short part again in Job 3. So it's obvious that God is responding to what Job has already brought up. So Job brought up Leviathan in his lament. I'll start in, he's talking about wanting to not be born. So he's like, on the night that he was born, that night oh my gosh, that night let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes. So we talked about like how Job is wanting to be uncreated because the suffering that life consists of is for him unbearable and unexplainable. And so he actually calls to those who would summon Leviathan to help him be unborn. So Job's not talking about I want to die. He's saying I wish I was never born, and I want to be uncreated somehow. And so this is that other thing about, if Leviathan represents the sea, the formless void, that going back into that would be like an uncreation rather than like, destruction.
Well, there's a couple things I'm thinking about. For one thing, like in dream interpretation, if you dream about water,
Mm-hmm.
It usually has to do, it's symbolic of emotions. And so it can be still water, it can be turbulent water, it can be,
Mm-hmm.
we all have those. We even describe our emotions like water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is, I'm wondering how much of this mythology is understood already in the book and by ancient people. So when you talk about Leviathan, are you talking about that inner emotional world that within which you live, right? And struggle. Like, this is what asceticism is. It's wrestling with Leviathan, if you want to put it like that. So, and then you read God's questions to Job, and you wonder, like, if Job already understands this as a battle with your own passions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
God says to him, can you put a hook into his nose, or can you
Press down his tongue with a cord.
there you go. Mine says bore his jaw through with a thorn. Totally different. But either way, when God asked Job this question, if Job already understands that this is significant of his passions, he would know how difficult that is. It's the most difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
To put a hook through the nose of your passions, to capture it, to make it your slave and you not its.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or will you play with him as with a bird, or will you bind him for your daughters, right? Like, you don't generally think about wanting your kids to play with you, the passions, right?
Right.
Or holding them in your hand like a little bird, something frail and fragile, and so just reading through God's questions, I'm really wondering how understood this already was by the ancient mind, right? That Leviathan, this sea monster, is representative of your own passions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think then it's not as confusing when you read the questions somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't have been to Job either, right?
No, I don't think so.
And I think also that it's more interesting. It's more not just interesting, but what's the word I'm looking for? There's a fuller sense in it's like when we were trying to understand how the thing of highest value judges. And then I tell the story about the cocktail party and Elon Musk walking in.
Mm-hmm. It just happens.
Then it's like, oh yeah, I understand that. Right?
Yeah.
But when you talk about it propositionally, it's really trying to grasp it.
Yeah.
And so that's why so much mythology is written in to these, like, they're stories, because they tell more truth than you could any other way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a poem, right? That's what poetry is. It tells you more truth, if you can imagine that,
Mm-hmm.
than anything propositionally would ever say.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about more things all at once.
Yeah, it's
More
like it's multivalent. So yes, it can represent the passions, the desires. It can also represent how your consciousness emerges out of your unconsciousness. Like, when you're born, you don't remember any of that, but somehow, like, as you grow up, as you become a person, at some point you start becoming aware of things, and your consciousness is like built within you.
Yeah.
And then it's also it's how anything emerges or emanates.
Yeah.
And that's how it talks about, you can even take it to, like, the Leviathan is the quantum the quantum field in which all the particles emerge from. and when we look at that, we're like, it was not actually stuff there. It's actually like just a bunch of probabilities. And then eventually we get an atom out of, or, particles that can form an atom. And you're like, what is it? So we still have that thing, or the edge of the universe where, what's beyond the edge. There's nothing beyond the edge of the, like, what do you,
Yeah.
as the universe expands, like we have, like, it's all those things at once. That's what,
Yeah.
and it's trying to point at some sort of universal truth about creation and existence. And so it's continuing
realities and opposites and what is judgment, like God doesn't seem to have a problem with either one of these characters.
No, we'll see he's actually bragging about Leviathan.
Yeah.
And he calls Behemoth the first of God's works. Mm-hmm. Like, all right. Okay, so let's go through some of these metaphors here. So we talked about piercing the jaw with the hook. This is all like fisherman stuff. So this is what you would do if you caught a whale or whatever. These are techniques to catch large fish and whales. And notice my
yes, I noticed it, right? I wanted to say something about it. It's so great, so amazing.
And so it's like, can you do these things to Leviathan? And it's one of those things where God, I don't know if God is pointing out the impossibility of the things or kind of like hinting at the possibility of things. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's probably true. That's both of those things.
Right. It's like both impossible and like, hey, what if you could?
This is the bridling.
Mm-hmm.
This is what bridling is, right? Like it's like it's not like it's taking the thing for what it is and making it useful to you. That's what it is. That's what bridling is. Okay, it's like when you bridle a horse,
you don't kill it.
You take the power of this animal, right? The the unpredictable power of this animal, and you use it for your own personal gain. Like you use it in a more pragmatic way, right? Mm-hmm. And it comes through So
well, that's exactly what he's talking about when he says, will you play with him as a bird or put him on a leash for your girls?
Yeah.
So that's one use. Here's another use. The traders can bargain over him. They divide him up. You can bring it into the marketplace, and then you have all this resource and material. It's like, could you do that? And then it returns back to, can you fill his skin with harpoons, his head with fishing spears? And then he kind of talks about the impossible. He's like, lay your hands on him and remember the battle. Do not do it again. And then like God is sort of directly referencing Job here at this point in verse 9, where he says, I mean, he's referencing what was said in verse 3, where Job is trying to conjure up Leviathan in order to hopefully be uncreated. And he says, God says, no one is so fierce that he dares stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? And this is interesting because God is saying, who can stand before me? And literally Job is standing there before him. You know what I mean? And God's like, who could dare stand before me if they couldn't even, like, you wouldn't dare ask to stir up Leviathan. I know you, like Job in sort of his lament, he requests this. He kind of requests it indirectly. He says, for those who would curse the day, stir up Leviathan for this to happen. And God's like saying, what are you talking about? Like your hope is false. And then who could stand before me? And then Job's standing there. It's just like, there's I don't know. It's wonderfully, wonderfully beautiful and ironic all at the same time.
Yeah.
So then I do want to get to, let's see.
This part here, or these next verses remind me of Blake's Tiger poem.
Right.
Because he says, who has prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Yeah.
Yeah, so he says, will not keep silence concerning his limbs or his mighty strength or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. It's sort of the impenetrability of what Leviathan is.
Yeah. This was the part that that I was thinking about. I was thinking about the bridling of the harmonic and the lyric. And then in verse 14, who can open the doors of his face? It reminded me of this card. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah. Where
See
she's
that?
opening up the mouth of the lion.
Yeah. And what is force? Remember?
Virginity. And that's that integrity.
Yeah. I just thought that was an interesting metaphor in light of.
Well, and that also gets to that illustration that we shared before. I got to bring it up again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. God fishing. So God the Father is up here on the left. This is the line of David coming down. Then there's Christ piercing the jaw of Leviathan. And Christ has integrity, born of a virgin.
Right.
This gets to the hint of how can you open up the face of a creature like that? Well, it's you can bait them. Like you have to entice them on their own terms. Mm-hmm. You can't force them. And this gets to more of like the bridling part, because you can't kill Leviathan. You can't make it do anything by force. Like, what are you gonna do?
Well, you don't really want to either. I mean, God doesn't even want to. God doesn't want to kill him. He doesn't want to. He somehow finds him beautiful. Like that's the tiger poem. I'm gonna look.
Okay, listen to this. So Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 10. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His head is the finest of gold. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk, sitting beside a full pool. His cheeks are like beds of spices, mounds of sweet-smelling herbs. His lips are lilies dripping with liquid myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with jewels. His body is polished ivory, bespeckled with sapphires. His legs are alabaster columns set on bases of gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughter of Jerusalem.
That is Psalm what?
Song of Songs.
The Song of Songs.
Chapter 5, verse 10.
Yeah.
You almost get this similar vibe of how God's talking about Leviathan.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's read now William Blake.
Okay.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So, like Leviathan, like the descriptions in Job and what you read there in Song of Songs and William Blake, you have this admixture of terror and absolute awe, right? Of this thing that God is. And it just seems to me that even like all throughout Job, when it talks about the donkey and the ostrich and Leviathan and Behemoth, it's all God loves everything that he made in all its quirkiness. Right?
Right. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches, sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. And this is a lot of talk of light and smoke and fire from the mouth and nose of Leviathan for it to just be like a passing thing. Like he's going into detail about this. And there's some connections here to, it makes me think of when Abraham makes his covenant with God. He cuts the animals in half and divides them up. Then I think Abraham falls into a sleep, and then God, to signify the covenant, passes through the middle as a flaming torch that's boiling and smoking, or smoking cauldron or smoking furnace. So that's such a, I don't know quite what to do with any of this imagery, but just point out some of the connections. So there's that reference. Then there's also in the Exodus, when they had the column of smoke by day and the fire by night.
Yeah.
So we have that. Then also, I think it's in Isaiah where it refers to Egypt as the smoking furnace on which they emerged, the people of Israel, which corresponds to the type of labor they were doing, which was making bricks, which involved the furnaces. But it also was a type of like, this is where God formed you and brought you out of. Just like God didn't put you in there to make you suffer. What he was doing was he was, just as you put, metal into the furnace to enhance some quality of it so that you can heat it up and form it or strengthen it. That's the imagery we get of why God put them into Egypt, into the furnace, and brought them out, is because God's using the furnace this continues the theme of God is creating something and doing something, and he's using Leviathan. And so there's there's all that imagery there. Okay, then in his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him and immovable. His heart is as hard as a stone, as hard as the lower millstone. Okay, so the millstone, like you use that for grinding wheat. And then right after that, there's we get into there's this. Okay, so there's the millstone there, but in verse 30, it says his underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
yeah.
so the threshing sledge, we talked about that before, but the threshing sledge, so threshing is when you separate the grain from the
The
the,
chaff.
the chaff, the the grass part, and so you can beat it, but a threshing sledge was a tool used for that. So it would have been like kind of like a bunch of boards put together, and on the underside of it, they they um, they make little divots where you can put rocks or sharp stones in there, and then they drag it across the
Right.
grain. So they would spread it out on a threshing floor, and then they would drag the threshing sledge over it to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And so in this metaphor, it talks about how Leviathan's underparts are like sharp potsherds, and he spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. So this is more of that. This is like another metaphor of what Leviathan is being used for. It's being used to separate the wheat and the chaff. And this word potsherds here um, is used back in chapter 2 when Job is infected with his skin disease. He
Right.
scrapes himself with a potsherd.
Yeah.
And so he's literally like scraping off the dead skin from himself. He's
Threshing.
threshing himself.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Um,
I just wanted to say, like,
mhm,
in the previous chapter, in chapter 40, verse 15, God says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made as well as thee." Right?
mhm,
And then he goes on to talk about Leviathan in chapter 41. So, like, this is not just something that existed and God used it for his good, you know. This is not God taking something that and making it good, making it a good thing. He made it. Like, there's a big difference there, in my opinion. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out while you're talking, because you're talking about separating wheat and chaff and fire and smoke. Right? And and I just want to be sure that people are not forgetting that God made this fearful thing, right? But he also
mhm.
says, like, he says, and I don't know how to take it. Like, maybe you know better than I do, but at the beginning he says, will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him like a little bird, or will you bind him for your maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? So there's all these things. It's like, and then God says, shall they part him amongst the merchants? Can you fill his skin with barbed irons? Like, what are you going to do with him? This really sounds like he's kind of batting this idea around all over the place. Like, are you going to make a little
Mhm.
pet out of him? Are you going to eat him? Are you going to make money off of him? Are you going to, right? What are you going to do with him? What are you going to do with Leviathan? And that is the question, right? What do we do with these Leviathans, if you want to make it, metaphorical,
Mhm.
in our lives, right? What are we going to do with those things? Are we going to look at them as something like, who made your fearful symmetry? That's the question Blake asks.
Right.
Did he who made the lamb make thee? And
Yeah.
if that is true, what are you going to do with him?
And God says, no one is so fierce that dares stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me?
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like an exhortation to me to really think about this, not in a conventional way, let's say, to really, really consider God's challenging the reader and Job to really think about, what are you going to do with Leviathan? What
Mm-hmm.
are you going to do with him? It's a good question.
No, and like you said, it is like the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and even in this, like when it says he spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire, like you wouldn't use a threshing sledge on the mire. You would use
Yeah.
it on a threshing floor, but the mire is
Mud.
clay.
I know when that image just evokes like horrific scenes of trying to clean that threshing sledge afterwards. You know,
Well,
I'm
it's
like,
also the
God,
like
could be
we're
full
the
of mud.
clay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
There was a section here. I'm trying to find it again. I thought it was right there, but I guess it's where he laughs at the sound of the spear and jab.
here.
What is
It's
it?
29, 28, 29. The arrow
He
cannot
counts
make
the
him.
iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, slings of stone are turned to stubble. There was one part that really corresponded with what was said in about the
Dar-
war horse in 39, which
Darts
was
are counted. He says darts are counted as stubble. He laughs at the shaking of the spear. Sharp stones are under him. He spreads sharp pointed things upon the mire.
mm-hmm,
That's really that there it is again, right? The sharp pointed things in the mire. Um, to me, that speaks directly to thorns. You know, like
right.
they get cast out into of the Garden of Eden into the thorns, right?
Mm-hmm,
And I would even say the mire and into the mire, okay? Because a mire is a place, it's like a bog. It's where you get bogged down, right?
mm-hmm.
And you get bogged down by what? Just trying to survive,
Just
right?
trying to
Going to
move.
work, raising children, you know, paying the bills, getting along with your community, all that. That's the mire.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does Leviathan do? He spreads sharp pointed things on top of it.
That's the threshing sledge.
Well, it says in 31
He
or
makes
no, 30.
30, yeah.
He
In
spreads
mine, that's where it says threshing sledge in my translation.
Oh, okay. He spreads sharp pointed things upon the mire. He makes the deep to boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Yeah. And
Well, the pot of ointment is interesting because the what's it like? Let me look up the word because the ointment there I thought brought up imagery of almost like something that smells good.
ointment is usually meant for healing,
Right.
right?
And here it means like a seasoning, a Eugen
Okay.
kettle.
What?
I don't know. But it has something to do with spices.
Okay. What does your 32 say? Mine says he makes a path to shine after him, which I also find interesting, but I don't know what you're
Behind him, he leaves a shining wake.
shining. Like, that's interesting.
And I mean,
Because we get it, we're attracted to shiny things. Like human beings, we're just like, ooh, look at that. It's shiny. And shining is also beautiful. I think we consider that shiny things to be beautiful, right?
yeah. Well,
Um,
and that goes with the pot of ointment right before it. Like something is happening that smells
smells
good.
good.
And there was that one quote where um I can't remember who said it. Someone in the 6th century said that Job
Oh yeah.
was
Who was
that
that?
that God beat Job with a rod so
Yeah,
that his fragrance could spread more
right.
widely.
I remember you read that in one of our
And this definitely makes me think of this
yes, for
pot of
sure.
ointment.
Yeah.
And then the shining wake. I think of the phosphorescent algae when ships go through the water, or even when whales are swimming. They'll leave shining in their wake,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
almost like a path or
I've had
something.
friends tell me who live in the Gulf Islands, in British Columbia, that there's certain times of the year that when you swim, there's this like magical because of the phosphorus in the water,
Yeah,
and it's just like incredibly beautiful. You're
Yeah.
just swimming, and every movement that you make is leaving this shining wake, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, now get this, Shari. Then it says one would think the deep to be white haired.
Mm-hmm.
So you get this imagery of the kind of the
Wisdom.
rolling ocean, with the white ocean. But yeah, but actually like white hair.
Huh.
And this is like the wisdom that, and the white hair has to do with wisdom, and the wisdom that comes um
The path.
with with encountering Leviathan, let's say.
Yeah.
Um and we're kind of closing out the whole poetic section of the book that started in chapter 3 with this also. And we, I talked about how Job at the very beginning is crying out like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, we have the deep, which is white haired, we have
Yeah.
like, the life of man.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that
Mm-hmm.
last two verses, upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear.
Mm-hmm.
He beholds all high things. He is a king over all the children of pride. What does your translation say? Is it different?
Mine says, on earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But let's see. The word for proud here is actually means a son. It means children. Like, I don't know how they.
What do you mean proud in
So
34?
in the Hebrew, the English translation is he is a king over all children.
Period.
Translate it as pride for some reason. And I don't have an explanation for that. But everywhere else this word it's like sons
Okay.
or children, mostly sons. The sons.
What is that? Do you know what that Hebrew word for high things is? Is that
Looks
what is
down
that?
on a creature without fear. He looks down on all that are haughty. Okay.
Oh,
It
that's
means
what you said.
elevated, powerful, or ignorant.
Okay.
Not ignorant, arrogant.
Arrogant.
But it's always translated as high or very or exceeding or proudly.
Okay, so maybe that's why they stick in children of pride.
Yeah, it could be.
Mm.
Um, but it's interesting because he's a creature that lives under everything, but yet he's the one that looks down on everything that is high.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, the pride thing.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone was going to remedy that, it would be, it's like you could think highly of yourself, right? You could think you were just all it until you meet Leviathan,
Right.
right? It's like it's same with Blake's tiger, right?
Right.
You got all your ducks in a row, everything's going beautifully, and then all of a sudden you see some eyes glowing in the underbrush, and out comes a tiger and stands in the middle of your path. I mean, I've had somewhat an experience like that when I met a bear, like face to face,
Yeah.
and I just was like, I'm gonna die. Like that was my first
There's
conclusion.
nothing. Yeah.
That was it, and nothing mattered, and nothing else mattered. I was just reduced down to flesh that was gonna be torn apart in any moment. Yeah. So yeah, and that is what happens, when something horrific, you know, comes into our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, all the other things that we think are important, they just fade into the background.
Well,
And
it reminds me of that story you told about your goat that almost died.
mm-hmm.
And then after that, weren't you saying he was like totally different? And he
Oh
was
yeah, You mean the one that was different with me?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because I nursed her back.
because
And then
it
she
was
would,
like a
yeah,
near death experience, and then after you, yeah, you nursed her back, and then
yeah, yeah. And then there's a bond there.
right.
It's
Well,
total.
and the people talk about rock bottom or a near death experience that changes everything.
Well,
Um,
I've thought a little bit about this because I don't know if I'll be able to scrape my thoughts together right now, but oh, I was reading something recently. Now I can't bring it to my mind, but there is something to, I mean, okay, where do I start? This is such a huge topic. Like we push death away, right?
mhm,
And I think also it's not even like, for me, I'm at the age now where I think if I planted a tree, I probably wouldn't see it grow to be very tall, right? Because they grow so slowly. And I'm coming to the end of my life, right? So now my mortality is becoming more and more apparent. Whereas, like when I was in my early 30s or whatever, and I had little kids, I felt like I was going to live forever because, in a
mhm,
sense, you are at the beginning of something, right? And
mhm.
it is a forever, in a way. Um, and there is how do I put this? I hate sounding morbid about this because it's not really morbid at all, but there is I don't think you can remain the same when you voluntarily encounter death, right?
Mhm.
If you involuntarily encounter death, well, that might be traumatic, right? Like if you see someone die in front of you in a violent manner, like in war, for example, um, or you're surrounded by like horrible, horrible death, or you're kidnapped and like those kind of things will inflict trauma that you have to heal from. But
Mhm.
if you voluntarily move towards something like and really, this is what I think Heidegger's talking about when he talks about being towards death. Then there is I think Michael Martin mentioned it last time in our meditations on the tarot. He said that what comes out of that is a caring person. And I find that such an interesting twist, right? So Heidegger believed that if you if you're being in the world, which is a thing for him, right? This is, he coins these phrases, is comprised of being towards death, like coming to terms with your own mortality, which is for him what he believed was that was one of those things that you can experience. It's
Mhm.
yours. It's your experience. It's not everybody does it, but it's all their own, right?
Mhm.
Then what happens to the person who voluntarily moves into this landscape of pain and suffering, which is what I often talk about, is they actually become more caring. And
Yeah,
that I find really
well, we
interesting.
see that with Job after this. He mediates for his friends. Um, and I think I mean Job kind of involuntarily goes into all this mess.
Well, no, I would disagree.
How would you
Well,
differentiate it?
he involuntarily the suffering is cast upon him, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
this is this thrownness that he
Yep.
bemoans in the beginning when he says, "I wish I was never born," but he voluntarily moves into it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas his friends say, "No, don't do that. Just fix it, so it'll
Hmm.
never happen to you again, and you get restored, and we'll press all the buttons, we'll do the formula, and
Hmm.
then you'll be fine." Right. And Job goes, "No, I want to figure this out. I want to face to face. I want to talk about this. I want to know what's going on." He's
Hmm.
going deep. Right.
Yep.
And the friends, they don't want to go deep. They just want to keep it like light. God.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think that's always like when people have to recover from some sort of trauma, that's what they have to do. They have to voluntarily encounter it in order to
Mhm.
move past it. You don't move past it by repressing it. Like things get worse if you repress it or try to pretend like something
Yeah.
didn't happen or um yeah, so and since we're kind of at the end of the at God's speech, or we are at the end of God's speech, like what there I kind of see when Vervaeke talks about reciprocal narrowing and
Mm.
then reciprocal opening, and then this also corresponds with what I read in the Ethics of Beauty about trauma, where when trauma happens, the trauma becomes large and all consuming. So but the effect of it is it's a reciprocal narrowing. Your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller till it's just the trauma, and the trauma is running the show. And so like um reciprocal narrowing is responsible for addictive behavior or uh depressive behavior, or things that are not, let's say, just life-giving.
Hmm.
It Because your life just gets narrower and narrower, but you don't know how to get out of that. Like, how do you get out of that? And then, well, you have to move through it somehow. So this
Right.
is what Job's doing. He's pressing on. He's not avoiding. And then so in the Ethics of Beauty, he talks about how someone goes to war and they come back with some sort of trauma, and then uh the way to heal trauma properly, which is some of what we're saying, is like you voluntarily sort of encounter it through like therapy or talk or something. But that by itself isn't actually really like we don't really know what to do about PTSD, or it's not. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it seems more like the individual than it does actually the method. But he talks about how you need to involve the person in a larger world.
You
So
know,
he says,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, which is this it would be reciprocal opening, where you don't necessarily have them talk about the trauma, because the trauma is huge. It's all consuming. It's all they think about and all they do. So there's a way you do want to press into that, but there's also a way in which, like, let me introduce you to the world. So
community.
this community. So bring them back into the community, bring them back
Mhm.
into feasting and celebrations and the rhythms of life. And in a religious community, this would be like the liturgies of the year and the seasons, and get them back participating in all of that.
Mhm.
And what happens is the world opens up, then that and then what you have to do is you don't ignore the trauma. So it's not like you're ignoring it and it'll just go away because we've opened up this whole new world. No, the trauma actually needs a place to live.
Yeah.
And when it's all consuming and when it owns everything, there's no place for it to live. But in a large world, it can have a place. And
Yeah.
it's almost exactly like that Martin Shaw um,
Yeah.
poem, because they invite the
The serpent.
the serpent son to come live, and he's like, we have to make a place for it. And it,
Yes.
you know and by having a place, it actually takes all the you don't have to ignore it, you don't have to repress it. You also, it doesn't get to consume everything and destroy everything either. Like it has its own function. And so, part of why I think God ends his speech with Leviathan is because in the first part of the speech, God opens up the whole world again to Job. And then,
Mhm.
in a way, shows where Leviathan lives in it.
Yeah.
And
And that he has a place.
yeah, and that he has a place. And the metaphors for Leviathan is like, Leviathan could be death in the grave, or it Leviathan could also in ways be that side of God that Job was talking about, the side that has hidden God and caused all this suffering on him. Leviathan could be inside Job's own heart and soul, and it's a part of him that is, stirred up and chaotic and all that. And so the Leviathan metaphor kind of is, it's like a lot of Book of Job. It's multivalent, but
one of the things that I thought was interesting was, I think you mentioned this quite a while ago too. The comparison between Moses and Job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Job says, why do the righteous suffer, right? And this is the question that Moses is asking when he says, "Let me see, show me your glory."
Mm-hmm.
He's asking the same question, and then God says, "Well, you can't see my face. You can't see this head on, right? But you can see my back, or you can
shining wake.
You see the wake, right?"
Yeah.
So, and this is the same. This is this exact same thing in Leviathan, right?
Yep.
He makes a path to shine after him, and one would think the deep to be, right, hoary. It says in King James, but
yeah, white hair,
white-haired, and white-haired in ancient cultures is always the wise, right? The sage, the wise one.
Well, and you see in Revelation, Christ comes with white hair riding on a horse. He's riding on the war horse with white hair and a sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's also in Daniel, the white hair stuff. And it's also in Lord of the Rings. And Gandalf comes back. He's Gandalf the White.
Yeah, I mean that's mythologically speaking, that's always like the white hair is indicative of the acquisition of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And yeah. And I mean, Job 28 is about trying wisdom. To find it. Trying to find wisdom.
Find it in encountering Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's good.
Good.
Thanks, Shari.
Thank you, Jess.